Welcome to the webinar on the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. As Bonnie mentioned, I'm Nancy Molcenter, and I work for the Department of Public Instruction. And at the Department of Public Instruction, we have been working diligently over the past 2 years to put together information to help schools understand the new requirements under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and also we have begun to put together some information specific to families. So one of the documents that you have available is a frequently asked questions, and that's based on 2 years of experience of the types of questions that we know families are asking. And then the transition services document for families, as Bonnie mentioned, she was only able, the way that the system is designed, it only takes up to 5 handouts. So that's an additional handout that talks about how transition services can be put together using the resources from schools and DVR and also long-term supports and what the trajectory of that can typically look like. So that's another document that she can make available to you, or I can as well. So my contact information is at the end of the webinar along with some other partners. And so any of us can get you any additional information that you have. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. As you can see, what the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity has to do with is it has to do with really these 3 different components. One of them is transition planning for students while they're still in school, transition services that schools provide in conjunction often with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, and then there's a particular section in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act that has to do with sub-minimum wage employment and requirements for both schools and DVR related to sub-minimum wage employment for individuals with disabilities. So those are the things we're going to be talking about. I would like to say, too, as we get started, that I have worked very closely with several people at the Division of Voc Rehab related to how we are talking about the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, delving into the regulations to make sure that we're adhering to the requirements, and just planning for stronger collaboration so that students can have the kind of adult life that they want related to employment. And so I will tell you that I think from both the DVR side and the DPI side, we really do see this new law as something that has created opportunities for us to collaborate and coordinate better and for youth to have better opportunities for employment. So we really see it as a positive change. Just a little bit of background about the law. It was signed on July 22nd of 2014. And at that point in time, some of the portions that DVR had to think about went into effect right away. The main one was that this new law states that DVR, and that goes for Voc Rehab in any state in the country, has to spend a minimum of 15% of their funding for students. And so that went into effect right away. So DVR had to figure out some things pretty quickly. The portions that I will speak to that pertain to school requirements became effective in July of last year. So those have only been in place for a few months. So WIOA really reinforced the fact that DVR and schools should be working together. Prior to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, there was a requirement in place for about 20 years that school staff needed to make sure that they told students and families about the availability of vocational rehabilitation services, but there wasn't a requirement for students to work with DVR prior to going to sub-minimum wage employment, which is a piece that I'm going to talk about in a little while. I'm going to talk more in detail about that, but it's one of the ways that it strengthens that need for schools and DVR to work together. And WIOA did provide 2 different definitions. One of those is students, and those are individuals 14 to 21 who are still in an educational program. So as many of you may know, students with disabilities sometimes can continue to receive school services through age 21 if it's deemed appropriate by their IEP team. And we at DPI strongly encourage a process for thinking about that at least a couple of years before the student turns 18, so that the whole team is on the same page about how many years of services it's anticipated that the student is going to benefit from the school. And then the other definition is youth with disabilities, and that age range goes up to 24. So one of the questions that we get when we present on WIOA often is, well, how would there be a youth that's under age 18 who's not a student? And the answer to that question is that sometimes students, as we all know, sometimes students choose to stop attending school. They drop out of school. And so if a student with a disability stops attending school prior to age 18, then they are a youth. And then, of course, students don't remain in school services beyond age 21, so that 22 to 24 age range is considered a youth as well. In addition, just to touch a little bit on the last bullet on the slide in front of you, there was also an emphasis in WIOA for the workforce investment programs that often are run through our local job centers, that those needed to increase their focus on youth. And so I think for some of you, I'm not sure what parts of the state you're all in, but for some of you, you may have heard about additional summer youth programs for students and youth happening through the local job centers, and that's because WIOA asked the job centers to also, through their workforce investment programs, be part of the process of creating more opportunities for students to get work experience and learn the skills that they need to be employed after high school. So one of the things that I typically say to audiences when I present, and it's not explicit on this slide, but this law actually states on a couple different pages of hundreds of pages of the law, but in a couple different places it actually states that the intent of WIOA was to stop the pipeline of youth and students with disabilities going straight from school into sheltered work or sub-minimum wage work. And so we know at DPI, and also the folks at DVR know, that that is the intent that is stated in WIOA, that VR having a role with students earlier is one of the proven effective methods of supporting integrated competitive employment after high school. The other thing that this law did is it pretty clearly defines competitive integrated employment as being 20 hours or more of work at minimum wage or higher, and with opportunities to interact regularly with coworkers who don't have disability. And so it provided us a definition that we now have in common. And so we use it now at DPI, and DVR uses it too, and the adult system is also adopting that same definition that WIOA provided to us. The other piece that at DPI we really message strongly to schools is that nothing at all in WIOA reduces the responsibility of schools to provide transition services. And in fact, when you get a chance to look at the WIOA FAQ for families, you will see that one of the questions is about who funds transition services, and schools are still the primary provider of transition services. It's a mandated service in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, and so that's a message that we've been sharing with schools, because initially, I told you all a few minutes ago that the law was signed in July of 2014, and that really the 15% spending requirement for VR went into place first. And so for a period of time, there was a misperception, I would say, not just in Wisconsin, but around the country, that meant that DVR was going to take over, being the primary provider of transition services. And that is not the case, as you can see on that last bullet, that schools still have the primary responsibility when they're providing a free and appropriate public education and transition planning. So from our most recent version of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which was 2004, these are the components that schools should be providing to all students with IEPs. The federal requirement is that all of these pieces begin by the time a student turns 16, but in Wisconsin, our law is that all of these things are in place by the time a student turns 14. And so when a student turns 14, they should have a transition plan in place. We call it the PTP in Wisconsin, or post-secondary transition plan. And these are the components. A student, along with their team and family, need to decide on a post-school goal for education and training. And I just want to highlight the word post-school. And so what this means is that the student needs to think about where do I want to go to college, or what kind of job training do I want to have. Now, before I go on with the rest of these requirements, I just want to say that IEP teams and educators should fully recognize that a 14-year-old may have some ideas that don't quite seem to match where the student is going or what's available in the community, or that maybe the student may have a goal for education and training that the team may wonder if it's possible or not. However, the goal at that point in time for 14, 15, 16-year-olds is really to get their goals down on paper and start moving in the direction that they want to go, with a lot of support and information to help students understand what it takes to reach certain goals. And so I think this is, we hear this a lot at DPI. Well, how can a student decide at 14 where they want to go to college? Well, just have them generate some ideas and think about where they want to go. And that those education and training goals, or an education and training goal that a student comes up with for themselves, should also be directly connected to the next requirement, which is for them to determine a goal for employment for after high school. And just like the education and training goal, yes, a student may think about a job that they want without having a lot of information. That's okay. Any other 14-year-old, 13, 14-year-old may need a lot more information too, but we need a starting place. And then the last one is, the last requirement is to think about whether or not the student can benefit from independent living goals. And one of the things that we say at DPI is, although the team, the IEP team, can decide that an independent living goal isn't necessary, none of us know too many teenagers that couldn't benefit from having at least one independent living goal. I happen to live with 2 teenagers, and I have a lot of independent living goals for them as their mom. So we really like for teams to consider the benefits of getting down a couple of independent living goals into the plan. All of those post-school goals have to be based on the results of at least one age-appropriate transition assessment, and that assessment also has to include some information about the student's strengths and interests. So every year, the school, someone at the school, should be completing at least one age-appropriate transition assessment with the student and have the results of those available at the meeting to talk about how the results are connected to the goal. Students also have to sit down and think about and write down with their teams what classes they're taking and how those may be related. Now this becomes more pertinent to the plan in high school, just ensuring that courses that a student is taking are a match for where they say they want to go to college or job training and the type of employment that they want. But it's never too early to start thinking about what do I need to take in 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade to make sure that I can take the courses that I'm going to need a little bit later, because as we know, many have prerequisites. The next component of the transition plan that's required is that students and their families have to select with the teachers and the rest of the school team transition services that are going to be needed to help support movement toward the post-school goals. Transition services should also support attaining annual goals, and at least one of those annual goals must be related to a post-school goal. And so I know that that's just, it's a lot of words about goals and connections, but I look at a lot of IEPs and a lot of transition plans, and I think this is a good time to just say that in case any of you haven't ever heard this information, this requirement, the set of requirements that I'm talking about for students starting at age 14, that is actually part of the IEP. So anytime that a student 14 or older is having a discussion about the IEP, transition planning should be part of that. And so the IEP has to have annual goals. I have never looked at a transition plan and full IEP in which none of the annual goals were connected at all, because, and sometimes we get this question from schools and family members, well, how do I know if the annual goal is related? And one of the keys is that annual goals should really be supporting the student to move toward graduation from high school, and that's really the first step before they can go on to any post-school goals. And so any of the annual goals that are supporting the student to earn credits toward graduation or gain skills that they need to be successful academically or socially and emotionally are going to be connected. But but the school team is mandated to think about those connections. Okay, so as I started to present to schools a couple of years ago about WIOA, sometimes I would see this kind of a look on the faces of administrators and thinking that this was really a tremendous paradigm shift. But based on what I just told you about the requirements that have been in IDEA actually since 1997, but we use the 2004 reference to IDEA because it was the most current, and it did strengthen a couple of the transition planning requirements. So really, these requirements have been in place for quite a long time. And when we really analyzed the law, there were three main shifts for schools. So one of the documents you have, just in case you wanted to pull it up and look at it as I go through this section of the PowerPoint, is a WIOA summary for schools. And it's just one page, but this is one of the things we give out to school districts, and it describes these three changes in requirements. So this one I referenced earlier, but the change is that youth ages 14 to 24, and that range goes until the very last day that the individual is 24. So the day this changes is when someone turns 25 years old. So it's truly all the way through age 24. No one through age 24 can go directly into employment that pays some minimum wages unless that person has worked with DVR first. And so I say on my slide, and I tell schools this, that students and families really need to know this information, because prior to WIOA, sometimes students and their family members would say, you know what, we thank you for telling us about DVR, but we have chosen not to apply. And the future, you know, for me or my son or daughter is that they're going to go and work at the local sheltered workshop, and that's the plan. And so if students and families just need to know that the connection with DVR is going to have to be made prior to that choice, all the way through age 24. The next change was that WIOA states that schools are responsible for providing pre-employment transition services, and I'm going to show you what those are in just a minute, because WIOA spelled out 5 specific categories of pre-employment transition services. And so what we did at DPI is we took the transition services list that was available in the post-secondary transition plan, and we revised it to be aligned with the pre-employment transition service categories that WIOA outlined for us. And we also, when we made that revision, we really tried to change the terminology of the transition services so that it was easy for anybody who wasn't working in the school system or for DVR to understand. Because we know we have our own lingo. We kind of know we have our own language in education, and VR has their own too. So we really tried to make the terminology, anybody who picked them up could read them. So that's one of the documents you have, is a list of transition services. And it doesn't mean if you think of something that's not on that list that you can't add it to your transition plan. It just means that the team really needs to choose at least one transition service from that list to make sure that a pre-employment transition service is being provided. And I think if you take a look at it, you'll see we have not been able to think of any transition service that doesn't fit into at least one of those, one of the ones that we have listed, but we also recognize that sometimes people have very unique individual needs. And so this transition services list that you have as part of the webinar, we are trying to get that out to as many students and families as possible, because what we really want is for students and their families to have a chance to look at the whole list before a meeting and then come to the meeting prepared to say, hey, you know, these are, I really like these couple of transition services I think will be perfect for me, and then whoever is completing the PTP can enter those. So here are the categories. The first one is job exploration counseling. So when I talked about the requirements under IDEA for transition planning, I talked about the fact that at age 13 or 14, you know, a student may have some ideas about where they want to go to college or job training and what kind of a job they may want, but they haven't had a chance to do a lot of exploring yet. And so this is a part that between school counselors and other activities that are happening in middle schools and high schools to help all of the students explore. Some of you may have heard about academic career planning. This would be part of job exploration. And so it can be going out on visits, it can be having career days, it can be, you know, take your son and daughter to work day, it can be bringing in guest speakers to talk about different jobs and what they pay and what kind of training you need to do those jobs. The next one is work-based learning experiences. So for younger students, this can be things like helping out around the classroom, helping in the library, maybe helping in the cafeteria, maybe a school store. And then as students get older, having job shadows in the community, going out to do tours of businesses, youth apprenticeships and internships, and even, you know, getting some actual paid work experience, sometimes evenings and weekends, but supported in some ways by the school just for schools to help kids think about it and look for different jobs. The next one is counseling on opportunities for post-secondary education or job training, and this is something that special ed case managers, but hopefully in conjunction with school counselors, will be talking to all students. This is another piece of academic career planning, which will be a requirement for all schools to provide to all students, all public schools, I should say, to provide to all students starting in 6th grade, and that requirement begins next year. And so most students at the middle and high school level start to get some information from their educators about college and job training programs. So we want to make sure students with disabilities are included in that as well. The fourth one is workplace readiness. You may have heard of some things like some courses like skills to pay the bills and financial literacy. So those would be included here. Other things that schools do, and DVR sometimes too, are travel training in the community, learning how to stay safe in the community, banking, shopping, all those kinds of activities. So you'll see in parentheses with number 4, I have home and community listed, and that's because when you look at the PTP transition services list, we have broken that down into those 2 separate categories. When we worked with teachers on creating the new transition services list, they said, you know, we really see those as 2 separate things, and putting them into 1 category will just be too many to sort through, and we thought that made sense. So some of the activities that schools do with kids around cooking and maybe doing laundry and taking care of a home and space classes, that's typically separate from taking kids out in the community to learn skills. So we have 2 categories in the PTP for workplace readiness. And then the last one is instruction and self-advocacy. So it's something that we promote strongly in schools, that they help students learn about themselves and their needs. Largely in schools, it's related to academics. What do I need to be successful in my classes and in my school building? But as students start to learn about being successful at home and in the community, then we ask schools to branch out and help them think about, and particularly around employment. So if I know what my needs are for support at school, how do I translate that to a work environment so that I can help my boss and my coworkers understand what I need to be successful? WIOA specifically says here that it can include peer mentoring, and so that's something that DPI and DVR are both working on, thinking about ideas for that, because we think it's a good idea, and making sure that we're expanding peer mentoring opportunities for our youth with disabilities. So this is a slide. I do want to mention that I forgot to do this when I started, so I apologize. But Sarah Lincoln from DVR was going to join me today, and she had an all-day meeting that got moved to a different location, so it became not possible for us to be together to do the webinar. But she is going to be presenting a webinar, 4 facets about DVR 1 week from today. And so any questions that you have specific to DVR at the end, I will answer what I can, but I may also say, I may have you contact Sarah, or get your information, or have you send me an email so I can send it on to her, just to make sure that we get you accurate information. But the top bullet talks about that 15% that DVR is now required to spend of their funding on students. And in Wisconsin, that equates to about $9.7 million a year. And so one of the things DVR always likes to make sure people understand is that they were not given any additional funds. It was just that a certain portion of their funds, that 15%, now has to be spent on students. And so what does that mean, really, for our students attending schools in Wisconsin? It means that DVR really wants to meet them and get to know them, and really wants to provide services. But DVR wants to do that at the point in time when it makes sense for each individual student. And for DVR, that means when a student is ready to look for a job in the community. So we still have a lot of ongoing discussions based on WIOA about when is the right time to refer a student. And so I would just say that the best time to refer a student to DVR and get that student and their family connected is at the point in time when the student is really thinking, okay, I'd like to have a part-time job and get some work experience, because that's really what DVR is best at doing. Schools can provide all the other services around that. The other piece that's important to remember for students who are still receiving school services is that if a student were to maybe toward the end of their educational career want to have a part-time job that happened during the school day, that really would still be the school's responsibility, and DVR would really be more, would come into the picture more to support summer and evening and weekend experiences. And it's not that DVR and the school can't do it together, but that's kind of one way to think about the separation of the responsibility, is that schools are still going to be responsible during the school day, during the school year, during the school day. But DVR can help outside of those hours and outside of those months of the year. So that's kind of where the dual responsibility comes in. So DVR, on the last bullet, you'll see that they're still saying about 2 years before high school services are going to end. It is usually about the right time. But again, it is individualized. So this is the shift number 3. And I will tell you that from my perspective, I think that this is the one that has challenged some schools and communities a little bit more, which is that WIOA states that schools cannot pay for transition services if those services include working at subminimum wage or learning subminimum wage work. And so what I mean by the purchasing transition services is that as students get closer to the end of their time with school districts and the end of their educational services, in some of our communities, school districts are quite small and rural. And so they have, in the past, purchased services from vocational support providers or vendors. And in some cases, those services have included working for subminimum wage. And so WIOA now tells us that schools cannot have a contract in place with a provider for the purpose of purchasing any services that include training in subminimum wage employment. So this really goes back directly to that stated intent, congressional intent of WIOA, of stopping the pipeline of students going directly from school into subminimum wage employment. And so that means that even if the employer, the 14C or subminimum wage employer, says that they will pay the student minimum wage while the school has a contract, the school still can't do it. Because what WIOA says is that school can't pay for students to get trained in work that typically pays subminimum wage. And so we've had situations where I've gotten calls from teachers or parents and said, well, this employer is willing to pay minimum wage while the student is in school. So if we stop and think about that, what that would mean is that the student might work for 2 or 3 years and make minimum wage and then graduate from school and go into adult services and get a pay cut. So that's not what we want to see happen. The next one is that for those of you who are familiar with subminimum wage work, it's a piece rate work. And so the employer has to determine what a regular wage is for that work by doing time studies. So if the average person is sitting down to do this work, how much can they do in an hour? And then they decide how much each individual piece is worth, and people get paid at a piece rate. And so sometimes the students or youth will go into subminimum wage work, and they're really good at that particular job. And so they'll work fast enough to earn minimum wage. So I've gotten a number of calls about this. Well, what if the student is working fast enough and earning minimum wage or higher? But the law says no. Again, going back to that definition, that schools can't pay for services that include training on work that typically pays subminimum wage. Because the other way that subminimum wage work sort of plays out is that the student may have a job for 6 months that they are really fast at, and then a new job comes in and they're not making nearly as much money. But the other part of this, if we think back to the definition of competitive integrated employment that WIOA gives us, is that the students and youth have to have opportunities to regularly interact with people who don't have disabilities and who don't supervise them. That's another part of the definition. And so this typically a subminimum wage environment doesn't meet that criteria. And then the last question that I've gotten is, what if the student wants to volunteer? And again, the answer is no. No training on work that typically pays subminimum wages, not if the school district is paying for it. But I'm going to shift gears just a little bit here because this is a really important point. That for those school districts that don't have really strong transition services for 18 to 21-year-old students, because in some cases it's just a matter of resources and their population is very small. They may have a K-12 school all in one building, and they only have, one student every couple of years who really needs transition services after 12th grade, and so they haven't built a strong program. They can and are really encouraged to continue to work with providers, because vocational or employment support providers can be an excellent resource. But they just have to purchase services that are for community-based integrated employment training and services, not the sub-minimum wage employment. I will also say here really quickly that the other thing that DPI is encouraging districts to do is consider partnering with other districts that are nearby to build stronger transition services. Going back to my comment earlier that schools really are the primary provider of transition services, and so in areas where it's a challenge, we're encouraging schools to kind of think out the box and be creative and partner together and pool their resources to do that. So just to make sure people are clear, this is not a state law. So DVR and DPI didn't create this policy change. It's federal. It's a federal law, but we do have to follow it. And so we are looking at the last bullet. We're really trying to help people understand it, and we're also trying to help people figure out how to implement it, because we know that, like it says on the second bullet, we know that in certain communities and for some students in the past, the plan has been to go directly into sub-minimum wage employment. So what about after someone chooses? I'll give you a really quick review on this, and this is one of the portions of this presentation that's not my area of expertise, because I'm obviously with DPI, know the rules and regulations through school services. But I will say that I do know that if a youth ages 25 or above is in sub-minimum wage, or in some cases younger people will wind up in sub-minimum wage work if they work with DVR and have take a little bit longer to find a job in the community, they will get a review every 6 months to talk about what they're doing for work and whether or not they want to continue to explore community employment. And just an FYI for all of you that DVR has contracted with UW-Whitewater to do those interviews. So just moving into some best practice ideas. So I've mentioned academic career planning. I did mention youth apprenticeship, which is an opportunity that's collaboratively provided through schools and the Department of Workforce Development. So we really encourage schools to think about supporting students with disabilities to participate or at least apply for youth apprenticeships. We have our Transition Improvement Grant in Wisconsin. So we try to disseminate information and give schools best practice ideas. And also we host family events and events for teachers and transition partners. We had a Let's Get to Work grant project, which was a nationally funded. We got a lot of great information through that project, and we also have Project Search Expansion, another option for job training for students with disabilities, and the Promise Grant, which is working to help students and their families gain employment so that they can reduce their reliance on public benefits. We promote the use of a variety of assessment tools for that age-appropriate transition assessment piece, so that a student doesn't just have the same assessment every year, but that rich information is created through that process of assessing students' strengths and interests and skills. Having students take on a greater role in leadership in transition planning, and also really encouraging schools to help families be engaged and participate in the process. We, at DPI, we have recently developed a transition planning app to help support students and family engagement in the process, and we have a webinar on March 29th about the app. So if you're interested in that and can join us, we would love that. We also, on the second to last bullet, we have listened and done some focus groups with students and families, and they say that just telling us about DVR isn't enough. We really want you as the teacher to introduce us to the DVR counselor, and so both schools and DVR counselors are hearing that message. So we're trying to promote the idea that DVR counselors will spend more time in schools and available to students and family members, and then teachers can actually do a face-to-face introduction and talk about how DVR can help support the transition process. And then we talk about this a lot at DPI and at DVR, which is the last bullet is based on research that tells us that getting direct paid work experience is the strongest predictor of whether someone is employed throughout their adult life, because that's how they build a resume and confidence that they are able to work. And so we're really trying to promote through both schools and DVR that paid work experience for students and youth is one of the key factors. And so for DVR, we talked about meeting students and getting to know them 2 years prior to graduation, but also they're trying to increase their practice of getting students and families engaged in services right away, rather than having it be a 6-month process of meeting and creating the individual plan for employment and talking, but just getting kids out right away to start looking for experiences and work, and trying to be more convenient. I just talked about the DVR office hours at school, but even outside of that, DVR recognizes the need to not say to families, you have to come to our office between 9 and 4 or else we can't meet with you. So I'm seeing DVR really make some great efforts to be more available to students and families when it's convenient for them. I mentioned earlier the creating summer work experience options, and then providing supports to students to maybe have jobs after school and weekends, which is when most teenagers typically have jobs, evenings, weekends, and summers. So then I have 3 really quick videos for you, and this is getting close to the end of my presentation, so I think I can show these with a little bit of background information and then still have 10 minutes for questions. So I tested these before we started, so I am going to cross my fingers and hope that it all works well and you can all hear that. I was at step file. I started games. I reached games. I put games in space. Brandon is a very visual person. We started him off with a picture schedule of tasks, which has been faded out. We put in another accommodation, letter cards, and that helps him to start the game outside of things. It helps him be very independent. My family hardly doing working. Since working at Stockpile, he learned to be more organized, punctual. Brandon has blossomed work-wise and also socially. When I'm not working, I do social events. I go with friends. Brandon is going to be exiting school in another year, and our goal then is to help him by possibly developing something to maybe at the library or some other place of employment that builds on those skills that he already has gotten through his work experience opportunities, something that will be appropriate, something that he will enjoy, and that he can keep for the long term. Someday I will get my job. I get paid. And then I can do something on my own. My hope for Brandon after he graduates is that he can continue to do a job that he loves. I hope to see him living life like any other person in their early 20s. I'm a good worker. I'm on time. I don't work hard. Okay, so I just wanted to fill you in very briefly. So for Brandon, he was at Manitowoc High School, and his teacher supported him and his family to apply for DVR services. And so the job developer that you saw that helped him get the work experience, it was a paid work experience at Stockpile Games, she was funded by DVR. So it's a really good example of collaboration between the school and DVR and a provider. And school, his teacher, who you saw in the video, had worked with him for a couple of years to think about his skills and where he really wanted to work and create a transition plan. And so he always wanted to work in a place around video games or books. And so you saw that the work experience turned out really well for him. And he has a couple of different jobs now that he's still doing.
My name is Alexis, and I work at Best Buy. I pull, I stag, I clean up, and I do screen. I can't pick me up from school. I come straight here, find Bob, do one-time card. When Alexis first started at Best Buy, there was a job coach that accompanied her. He taught her the routines and the jobs that needed to be done. As Alexis became more comfortable with the job, the job coach would be able to kind of fade away, and Alexis started to rely on natural support, which would be Joe, which is one of the employees there.
So Bob knows Alexis will be here. He has me do other things in the store that he needs help with, and I know Alexis will be okay in the media department, farming and pulling.
It's pretty exciting, and for her, it's such a success. Alexis's worker skills grew, her communication skills grew, and her social skills grew. And I think that's something we maybe would not have been able to foster in the high school setting. And then the really neat part is that she's getting a paycheck. I tell my mom out when she's needed. I give to my mom to get something to eat and give her like gas in our gas tank. Alexis' internship at Best Buy helped open Alexis's eyes that she can pursue employment at some of these big companies. And it helps her understand that, yeah, maybe I do need a little bit of help at first, but eventually I will be able to do this on my own. I'm a hard worker. I take responsibility of what though. You got to tell me where to do something, I do it. And I'm a good listener. And I'm friendly. And I just love working.
Okay, so for Alexis, one of the things I just have to share, so her situation similar to Brandon's. Her school helped her get hooked up with DVR, who found her a job developer at a provider agency, and they helped her get the work experience at Best Buy. But one of my favorite parts about Alexis's story is that her first work experience that school helped her get, based on what Alexis said she wanted to do, was at a daycare. And after a few weeks, Alexis came back to the team and said, this really isn't going so well. And when we asked her why, she said that, well, I figured out I really don't like kids. And I really like to share her experience because it's a very common one, that just because one or two work experiences doesn't work out doesn't mean someone can't be employed in the community. And I think many of us have had not wonderful work experiences in our past, especially as teenagers, but sometimes with students with disabilities, they too often get put in the bucket of, oh, maybe this person just really can't work based on a couple of experiences that didn't go well. And it really isn't fair, because lots of people have work experiences that don't go well as teenagers. I'm going to show the last one briefly because it's really good.
Let's call it. Majorly.
Colin is a gifted beader who can take any kind of string material and partner it with a bead and just make something lovely. We have him doing necklaces, bracelets. We have him doing jewelry that we sell to our designer customers. In high school, when Colin came to us, he really liked stringing these big, giant beads onto a big piece of string. And so they took that, the staff that worked with us took that and said, well, we wonder if you can take a little bit smaller beads, plastic beads, and string them on and make keychains out of them. So he started doing that, and then he sells his keychains at the Viking Shop, which is like a morning coffee shop type of business at the high school. thought it might be great for him if we could pair with the business that's downstairs because they get more traffic in the morning. And so we work with both businesses to set up the scenario where Cullen will work downstairs in teasers to make his bracelets and jewelry and sell them both upstairs and downstairs. Cullen sits in an alcove in our store. It's right by the front door, so he can see people coming in the door and greet them and give them the sense that Cheezers is a welcoming place. It promotes business for DSS upstairs as well, because people go, oh, there's a bead shop upstairs? If they didn't know. When Cullen started out working for us, he was using larger hole beads and larger cords, and we determined that it would be worthwhile to discover what additional kinds of capabilities he had. We gave him some training, and that let us determine exactly what Cullen would be capable of and what he likes to do the most. We've been able to increase the complexity of the work, reduce the size of the work, and he's had no troubles whatsoever. We had a really cool project come up that required us to make about 200 bracelets for a Daughters of the King tea that was held locally in town here. We basically had him do almost all 200 of them. Now we sell these regularly, and he makes all of them for us. I can count on what he's able to produce. So if I know I have a show in a month or two from now, I can work together with him to have him do part of the job that he can do, and then I do my part of the job. I'm very fussy about who works here and who is in the store because I want top-notch people in here. And Cullen really fits that bill. I truly believe everybody has unique gifts, and we've been able to discover his and put them to use in a way that is encouraging to him and creates products that customers really love.
Okay, so my quick background on Cullen is that when I met him a few years ago, his teacher at the beginning said he was using larger beads and larger string, and what he actually was carrying around his high school was a bucket of wooden blocks that typically preschoolers would play with, the large wooden blocks that you put 2 strings through. And so within a matter of just a couple of years, people said, hey, we need to take this strength and skill of his and see what else he can do with it. And as you could tell from the video, he's very highly capable beader and makes a great deal of jewelry and still works at Cheezers now. So just a great example of really taking something, a strength of a student, and working with it and moving that into a potential employment opportunity. So I think that's the end of my presentation. What I have on the screen for you now is my contact information, but also 3 other experts. A lot of times the 4 of us present together on this topic, and so I wanted you to have all the contact information that you need. And I'd like to know if there are any questions now.
Well, at this time, I don't have any, Nancy, typed into the question box. We can give everybody another minute or 2 if they do have a question to go ahead and do that. And while people are thinking if they have a question that they would like to share, I didn't get the opportunity to formally introduce you before, and I'd like to do that if you don't mind. Nancy has been working in the field of disability services for more than 25 years and strives to support inclusive outcomes for all people. She holds a master's degree in special education from Northeastern University and a PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in special education and rehabilitation psychology. Nancy serves as the educational consultant and transition improvement grant director at the Department of Public Instruction. And in addition, she teaches courses in the UW system. So I just wanted to make sure that I got a chance to introduce you formally, Nancy, and we do have a question, if you don't mind.
Of course not. Yeah.
Here we go. Do schools need to provide at least 1 opportunity per category for students?
No, that is not, it's not required. That WIOA doesn't state, which I actually wish it did, so that's a fabulous question. Because when I first started to study this law and analyze it, I was really hoping that it stated that every student should have the opportunity to have at least 1 service from every category. And it doesn't state that that's a requirement, but the other reason it's a wonderful question is because that's what we highly recommend. So we do say that that's the best practice, but it's not a WIOA requirement. But great question.
Okay, thank you. And we do have another question. Should I just call DVR directly if my daughter is going to graduate this year? Is there someone in particular I should ask to speak with?
Yes. So that is a wonderful question. And so the person who asked that question and anyone else who has the same question, please email me. And what I can do, I mean, you're welcome to look for this yourself too, but on the DVR website, if you go to the DVR website and then in the search bar, you put in list of high school counselors, you get a link, and there's a specific person at DVR that's assigned to every single high school. And so if somebody wants to email me, I can get you that list, or if you want to go onto the DVR website, or you can certainly email Sarah or Deanna as well. Any of us can get that to you. But there is a particular person, and I would say to the first part of your question, yes. If your school hasn't yet made the effort or had an opportunity to directly introduce you to your VR counselor, then, and your daughter is going to graduate this year, I would say yes, go ahead and make the outreach. One of the things I do try to share too is that schools really should be making the connection with DVR, but schools can't make the referral. That has to come from the student and family. So a student and family has to basically sign the application for the referral before DVR can move forward. So it's perfectly fine to skip the school. We want the school to make the connection, but if they don't, yes, go ahead and do that. And just let me know if you want the list, or if you get it someplace else, that's great too.
Okay, and then one other question. Can a student have his or her own business if it fits the categories?
Yes, that's another great question. So WIOA does speak to self-employment. And what WIOA states is that to be considered competitive integrated employment, in self-employment, the individual should make about the same amount of money for that service or product as somebody else in a similar size community who does the same kind of work as self-employment. So in other words, what it asks is if a school district is going to support, and DVR too, so if a school district and DVR, either or both, are going to support someone to develop a business, then they really need to do a little bit of research about what does somebody else who has this kind of a business typically make, how many hours do they usually work, how many employees, that kind of thing. And so under WIOA, it can definitely be supported, but the team needs to consider some of those factors. And then the other thing that WIOA asks the team to consider, in addition to money, how much money the person is going to make, is how do they have opportunities to interact with people who don't have disabilities. So are they making phone calls? Are they doing it over the internet? Are they going out to shows to sell their product or to market their business? So those are the factors that WIOA asks us to consider.
Okay, and at this time we don't have any other questions, and I just noticed that it's exactly 1 o'clock now. So I'd like to say thank you so very much, Nancy, for a wonderful, wonderful presentation, a most informative one. This does conclude our webinar for today. We'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Wisconsin Facets has over 100 scheduled trainings and webinars for 2017. Please feel free to check our website calendar and register for any oncoming trainings that you might be interested in. There are a couple that Nancy has mentioned to you that will be following up this one, the one on DVR and the one on the transition app. So if any of you are interested in following up Nancy's discussion today, please feel free to register for those. Please watch for the short evaluation that will be coming your way. We'd like to thank everybody again for their participation. And again, Nancy, thank you so very much for your presentation today.
You are very